Can you build muscle on a plant-based diet? Is protein actually important? This is what we're going to be talking about today is live with Nick Caputo. We're going to be discussing different protein myths, our personal transformations, what we went through, the different diets that we tried, and ultimately what we're doing today that has been able to generate results for our physique, for our body. So that's the topic of the day. If you're interested in building muscle, if you want to refine your physique, if you're looking to transform yourself in any way physically, it's going to be a good live to listen to because we're going to share our personal experiences as well as tackling some of these myths that we tend to hear in the conscious community and the spiritual community, and that people just take for face value, but they don't really dive in to actually research or learn from.
What's up, Quetzal? How we doing?
Doing good.
Everybody?
Yeah. Everybody, welcome. So you want to start off by sharing your personal experience, your transformation, your journey a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I started out, I've been working out and cared about my physique for most of my life. I was an athlete in high school and, always really was interested in bodybuilding and my physique. And then when I got into some restrictive dieting practices to fix my gut, I had some serious gut issues, and that was what I was pursuing at the time to fix that. I lost a lot of weight, lost a lot of muscle mass. For those of you who know me and remember, I was about like 110 pounds at 5'10". Lost a lot of muscle mass, pretty much was like super small and was on a mission to, rebuild back up. So I changed a lot of protocols about my diet. Can you hear me?
You said that you had it's a little bit windy, but you said that you had an injury as well.
An injury, yeah, I broke my neck. That was I was like 2017, I think that was. Yeah, so I fractured my C6 in a snowboarding accident, and then it was right around that time where I wanted to, get my diet serious in order to fix my neck faster, and also at the same time I was like, now's the time where I'm going to fix my digestive shit and like take it head on now. So it was kind of like right around the same time where I made those changes, and then I went deeper and deeper into the fasting, whatever, and ended up not really fixing my gut, and I lost a lot of muscle mass. And we'll definitely cover on Monday in the Call It the Wild Brotherhood why that is, and all the details about why it didn't work out for my gut and why losing the muscle mass actually really affected my gut negatively, and how building muscle actually fixed a lot of the problems with my gut. But so I set out to really like rebuild my body back and, better than ever. And that's what I accomplished. So within a matter of a couple months, like less than a year, maybe like 8-9 months, I put on about 35 pounds, and about 25 pounds of that was lean muscle. So that was according to like my Renfro scale, one of those body composition scales that tells you like muscle mass versus like body fat percentage. Right. So it was cool to see, like, it gave me, I have like the graph still on the app where it shows the trends where like in that period of time, it was like, I was down at like 6% body fat, 6-7% body fat. And then I went up to like 10.5% body fat, and then down to around like 10.2, 10, which is like where I found at maintenance. But, I was around 115 pounds, 110 pounds, something like that. Went up to about like 145.
So at that point, your body was really going to take up muscle because you didn't have any muscle really. So it just really, because there's like it plateaus, right? So it's like, as soon as you start building muscle, like over time, it gets harder to build more and more muscle. It doesn't just continue that same trajectory, but at that time, you probably had very little muscle, but your body was able to build off of that.
Yeah, they call it noob gains or like newbie gains. Yeah. My body was like dying for fuel and dying to build muscle at that point. I feel like I had such low muscle mass that it was so necessary to build again. My body was like super sensitive to the training and ready for anything.
Let's talk about some of the protein myths that you heard like during your different dietary transitions. Like for me, I went through the raw vegan, and that was a big thing, right? It was like this perspective against protein. If everybody's familiar, like with Dr. Morris, I know he talks against protein. A lot of that, like the fruitarian community, they're very much against protein. And so I'm curious to have this conversation about what has been your experience with these different protein needs, and through your experience, have they held up, or have you seen something different?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of came in through the same lens initially with the whole raw vegan thing, and I even took it a step further and was really kind of went like right from normal standard American diet to like straight up fruit, only fruit for like a pretty long time. And I was under that kind of same oppression, got a lot of the same information regarding like protein not being necessary, even some people saying protein is bad, you don't need it, whatever. And I was honestly even an advocate for not eating protein because obviously I wasn't eating protein at the time, really, even though you get like amino acids and stuff from fruits. You were like obviously not adequate protein intake from eating fruits. So, yeah, I mean, over time, they definitely haven't shown to be accurate to really any degree in my experience, other than, do you need them to survive? For a long time, I didn't. So I did survive for a very long time without them. I would say some other factors definitely played a role in that as well. I was living somewhere where I was very much in nature and a lot of other factors that helped me survive the fucking lack of nutrition. But realistically, I still stripped away muscle over time. And realistically, the muscle mass that I had built up until the time where I did that is realistically the only reason I was able to survive, because I was just living off my own muscle for a period of time. And honestly, I think that's why I felt good, because realistically, that was the best food I ever lived on in my life.
But that's the other thing, right? You get people who are like transition to like a different diet that's way more restrictive, but they're kind of still living off of the body that was built off of other food, animal foods or whatever other foods, right? And then that'll carry you for a certain amount of time before that breaks down, and you're really only like they say, I don't know if this is true, but they say like the body regenerates itself every 7 years or something like that. I don't know if that's completely true, but there is something to that. The fact that our bodies are built off of food that we've been eating the last year,
Our whole lives.
For a while, our lives, yeah. So it's like a lot of times people transition to other diets and they're like, well, I feel fine, but they're really operating off of a body that wasn't built off of that. So really, when you start going into how can we assess it, it has to be multi-generational. I mean, you're born to a certain diet, that you live, your parents were born to that diet, they live their life that diet, and then they have you. Now we can assess, multi-generationally, it's functional to procure like human life or sustain human life throughout multiple generations. But this is what we go from like one diet to the other. It's kind of hard to gauge that. And so that's kind of been my experience as well. And that's why I like fasting. It's like you break your body down and then you can rebuild it to see what is actually working. So yeah, it's just interesting to me, like the whole protein analysis. And it's like people try to say like, oh, you can build protein on a plant-based diet or even on a fruit-based diet. There's people who are advocates for that. So let's talk about that. Like, what's your perspective on that? Building muscle on a plant-based diet or a fruit-based diet?
So I'll start with the fruit and the fasting stuff first because I think it's separate from vegan. I think like plant-based, it's different.
Right.
When it comes to the fruit stuff, I mean, I've never seen a single person put on muscle while eating only fruit. Everybody who I know in the industry, in the whole niche, that is eating exclusively fruit and is jacked out of their fucking mind was jacked before they got on fruit, and fruit only helped them lean out. So it didn't necessarily, didn't build size. No one is consistently gaining size, building muscle. Like hypertrophy is not taking place in people that are eating only fruit. And it didn't happen with me either. And I noticed a lot of people, from my own experience, like are capping. They're straight lying to the public on social media because I actually did a lot of the things that these people were saying that they were doing, and my muscle just withered the fuck away. And all the other variables for me, like a lot of other things that do help with muscle building, like being out in nature and sunlight exposure and a lot of other things, were on point. And regardless, no matter what, with that diet, muscle was not being built. So
that's what I don't like about the internet is that you can have that a lot, right? People promote certain things, but you don't really know what they're doing, right? Like I've seen a couple of those people. I mean, people like Liver King,
yeah,
but there's other versions of that kind of energy where they're like talking against animal food, and like they're not eating only what they're promoting, but just because of their body composition and stuff. But then there's also like this genetic factor. So as far as your research goes, like on muscles and protein, what's like the genetic implication of how much you put on depending on our genetics?
So yeah, I mean, before I get into like the other stuff about like the plant-based diet, I think it's different as far as the protein goes in the muscle building. But for the genetics thing, I mean, your genetics definitely do determine to some degree how much muscle you can put on, and especially in like certain areas of your body. Like you can have like shitty chest genetics and like great shoulder genetics, things like that, based on, you know, your ancestors and what they did and how, you know, they grew muscle over time, even like sunlight exposure throughout time. So a good example for like genetics and like your ancestry being a factor of like the muscle that you can build. For example, like West Africans, right? Their ancestors lived in the highest UV index area of Earth. So they typically have the lowest myostatin level. Sunlight exposure at UV light lowers myostatin, which helps you build muscle. So typically, even genetically, like they have the ability to downregulate myostatin even further, which allows muscle to grow even more. Whereas like areas in like Eastern Asia have higher levels of myostatin overall because of their sunlight exposure throughout their ancestry, and they have much more difficult times building muscle in general. So, I mean, those are just two examples of the extremes, but realistically, there's like a sliding scale, and it's a spectrum based on like your full ancestry of like what ability you have to naturally put on muscle. But most people do have the ability, like everyone should be able to build a pretty decent physique regardless. You might not look like Chris Bumstead. You'll never look like Chris Bumstead naturally, but like, you know, you'll be able to build a decent physique regardless of your genetics.
Right, right.
Like, even if you have shitty genetics, you can still get in decent shape with the hard work and the consistency and the diet and the, you know, the sunlight exposure, things like that.
Right. And so, oh yeah, I guess we can go into the plant-based you know, there is a difference between like certain food being able to build up muscle to what degree, like that is impacted by the diet and the protein and the types of protein that we're consuming. So, let's talk a little bit about that. I think the plant-based.
Yeah. So I will say that it can be done plant-based. So I don't think it's as efficient or optimal doing it plant-based, but it can be done. I know people on the internet that have actually built some muscle on plant-based diet. So it's not like it can't be done. Like there are, you know, a decent amount of amino acids available in proteins. However, it doesn't even compare to animal proteins. So it can be done plant-based, but it's not as efficient. If you look at, they have, it's called the DIAS score, the digestible indispensable amino acid score of a food. And it basically is just based on the amino acid profile, how much of each essential amino acid are in the food and how balanced are the ratios of amino acids to each other. So basically overall, how overall quality is the protein. And if you look at, you know, foods that are animal foods like milk, like whey protein, like eggs, like meat, like fish, salmon, oysters, these are all like super high quality proteins. The DIAS scores are over 100. I think oysters are in the 90s. But all the other ones that I just mentioned are over 100. And if you look at like the best plant proteins available, realistically, they're like protein isolates from powders. So you would do like soy protein isolate or I forget what the other one is, but they're around like, I think like in the 90s for the powder. So if you're doing like protein powders that are plant-based, you can get like decent quality protein, but slightly less good than like whey protein, for example. And then like most other plant foods, like real plant foods, they're usually not getting above 70 for a DIAS score. Most of them are missing at least one amino acid that's big. Pea protein is the other one somebody just mentioned in the comments. That's the one I was talking about other than soy. The other one would be pea. So the main thing with these is that you would still be able to build adequate muscle with these. That being said, you'd have to eat a much bigger volume of food in order to get enough amino acids, and you'd have to do a lot of food combining and a lot of research to make sure that you're getting the right amino acids in combination so that your meal overall has a higher DIAS.
Right. And I think that's what I like about animal foods is that it allows me to eat simply, right? Like I can eat fruit, some meat, and some eggs, and like that's like I'm hitting all my macros. And, you know, like it's just super simple. Whereas what I notice about people who eat plant-based, there's like 50 ingredients in the bowl because they're, you know, even if they're not bodybuilding, I think that your body, you're subconsciously trying to receive certain nutrients through that combination of foods. And I was looking at in Wikipedia, they have the different proteins. And the thing about that I noticed about the plant proteins is that they're not complete proteins. Right, they're missing some of the amino acids. So in order to get the complete profile, you kind of look at the chickpea with the with the other plant-based protein. So you're doing some combinations to try to achieve what you would just get from like a meat in general from one ingredient, right? Or one ingredient food. And so to me, it just makes more sense, more digestible and stimulable without the ideology. But of course, if you have the ideology, that's what stop it. It's your ability to utilize, some of these foods that we're talking about. But it's just interesting that because when people think about energy, right, or diet, what's the thing they say in the conscious community? Like, oh, I get mine straight from the source, right? Like, I don't need no middleman. Like, I get my energy, but it's like that's the wrong way to look at it. Like, no, you should be getting it from the thing that's accumulating. So when you get an animal, you're getting an accumulation of that energy. Why would you go to try to get it from less concentrated sources where you could get it from a source that's more concentrated, that's going to give you more of it at any one given time, instead of trying to sit there and get energy from the sun? You could get it from the animal that got it from the plant, that got it from the organism, from the soil. So it's like, I think that that really changed my perspective on how I look at it, because it's all coming from the source, but it's concentrated at the animal level. And animals have organs just like we do that allow them to filter out, to transmute toxins. So it's like, even at that level, you could argue there's more benefit into consuming animal foods than there is plants. But I'm not saying plants are bad, or I love saying foods, I love fruit, but I'm talking about from an efficiency. Like, if you were strictly to be like, what's the best thing that I could insect to generate this result, it would be primarily animal foods, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. I did a video on this exact topic probably about a year ago, and I called it, do we have the energy pyramid backwards? And I basically, a lot of the, like the logic that's used to, justify like the breatharian and stuff and like the super restrictive diet stuff, saying like, oh, getting it back from the source. But if we're saying like, each animal or each organism that comes in contact with the sunlight and then transfers it, it's kind of adding its own flavor to it. It's adding its own experience to it. It's using that, those nutrients, that energy to do something and then passing it on to the next thing. And the more things that it passes on to, it actually has more experience and more information than it originally had. So it's like, do we really want to get it from the source before it has any fresh information from here on Earth? Or do we want to eat it with all of that information? So you're getting the same information from the sun, from the cow. However, that information from the sun went through the plant, went through the cow before it got to you. So it has more information about your environment and more, I guess, like data that is transferred to you when you eat it. So yeah, 100% I would agree with you.
Yeah, and that's just like an ideological perspective, right? There's
it's like
practical application of it. Like, like just give two people that have very similar genetics, give one like animal foods and give the other one plants, and like have them try to build muscle, and like we can generate data from that, as opposed to like the ideology behind it, which is more like you said, philosophy, more like almost like a religious based philosophy. Like a lot of religions have restrictions, not because those things are bad, but because there's more so like taboos on them throughout time that religions have developed. And I see the same way this is happening with where Robbie did on it. The more access we get to resources, food, we can be more selective about it. But just strictly talking about from like the muscle composition building, one of the things that I did notice, and I mentioned this in our podcast, was that the muscle that you build from fruits or raw vegan diet, and that's the only thing I have to gauge it, is different than the muscle you build from non-raw vegan diets, I guess I could say. It seems like raw vegan diets don't produce as, I don't know, a solid of a muscle like during or relax. It doesn't feel or look solid. Once you flex it, it appears like more structurally sound. But like at resting, the muscle is more like flabby. And I noticed that in myself and my brother, who's actually still raw vegan, like the muscle composition is actually different. So there's something to that, right? Because protein is the structure that builds the muscle. And it's interesting that we're talking about like masculinity, because structure is a masculine component. So protein, literally like the masculine nutrients. It's the masculine nutrient. It's crazy. And it's crazy that people are in that and trying to not embody that in the community because it's spiritual gets really intertwined with the feminine. That's a whole different segue. But yeah, the protein itself is the structure that builds our body. And so different proteins or amino acids will build a different structure. Like, so I don't have no research on this. This is my theories based on my own observation. But I just want to share that.
Yeah, I've heard you say that to me before once, and I was like, yeah, it kind of does make sense. I could see that. I haven't like practically, I didn't build any muscle when I was a fruit or raw vegan, so I can't really say from experience. But I could kind of see that like in my observation of like looking at people and like in person and seeing, different groups of people based on like their diets, like what their muscle looks like. The people that eat animal foods do just have that like denseness, like the thicker like appearance to them and like the weight.
Right.
That's genetics too. Something I wanted to mention as well is that like genetics basically like they're the code. Your DNA is like the code for making proteins, and proteins do a lot of things other than make muscle, but like protein synthesis is literally what muscle building is. So your muscle, like your DNA is what's in charge of that. So of course, like different genetic mutations or anything that compromises muscle protein synthesis from your genetics will of course affect your muscle building. I forgot to mention that before. So yeah, is there anything else I wanted to add here on that topic? I'm not sure.
Yeah. If anybody has questions, just put them in the question box. We'll go over them right now. So yeah, this Monday we're having Nick is actually giving a presentation with Wild Brotherhood where he's going to go break down why you should build muscle, how you should build muscle, the dietary component, like the hypertrophy, the actual working out training aspect of it. We're going to be discussing all of this like in depth during that presentation. So if anybody's interested, that's for Wild Brotherhood members exclusively. And also I wanted to mention the next 3 people that sign up for Wild Brotherhood, I'm going to be sending them some animal-based protein powder. So the next 3 people that sign up for Wild Brotherhood, if you've been thinking about it, right now it's going to be a good time because I'll send you a free ancestral fuel from ancient strength protein powder. So you can get started on your journey with a 30-day challenge. Basically, we're going to be tracking our calories, tracking our nutrients, our macros, and setting a goal for ourselves, whether it's to build muscle or lose weight or both. We're going to be helping you out with that. And of course, so if anybody has any questions, put them in the question box. Besides that, have anything you want to add?
Let me think. Yeah, there is one more thing. When it comes to protein quality, that I feel like is a difference between animal and plant foods. When it comes to muscle building specifically, right, there's one amino acid that stands out among the rest that is the most important for muscle protein synthesis, and that is leucine. So if you look at the leucine content of different foods, you're basically looking at the muscle building potential of different foods. Now, I mean, everyone's daily like recommended intake for leucine would be different, but for the average person around my size, it would be about 3 grams a day of leucine. And in order to get 3 grams of leucine on a plant-based diet, you're going to have to eat a much higher volume of food compared to, eating animal foods. Like you can eat I think it's like 3 eggs and there's 3 grams of leucine. You can eat like a 4.5 ounce steak and that's your 3 grams of leucine for the day. So you can see how like if you're eating a decent amount of animal foods throughout the day, you're hitting that leucine target like it's nothing, and you're even getting extra compared to the regular requirement. And that being said, that 3 grams a day is for a non-athlete who's not aiming to build muscle, who's just existing, who's about my size. So if you're bigger than me, or if you're actually aiming to, if you weigh more than 150 pounds and, you're bigger than 5'10", and you're looking to actually build muscle, you have a much significantly higher requirement of leucine. So you would have to obviously eat more. But I mean, that's just like an average person who's not even an athlete, just to maintain muscle without losing it for muscle protein synthesis versus muscle protein breakdown. Like that's what you're looking for. One other thing I wanted to add too is that no matter what, you're always constantly at the same time, simultaneously breaking down muscle and rebuilding muscle. So your muscle is never staying what it is. It's always being broken down and always being rebuilt at all times. So basically the net difference of whether or not you're building muscle or losing muscle or maintaining muscle is the net difference between muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown.
And that's affected by what, like your intake?
A lot of different things. It could be your intake of amino acids, your protein. It could be your hormone status. It could be your androgen receptor sensitivity or density, meaning like how sensitive your receptors are to the hormones or how many receptors there are in certain muscles or areas. It could be proteins that are regulated by genes like myostatin that block muscle protein synthesis and signal muscle protein breakdown. So things like sunlight exposure, things like how frequently you train, how long you've taken to recover, all these things can affect your differences in muscle protein synthesis and breakdown. There's honestly so many things, like too many to go over in this one live. We're going to talk about them all on Monday.
It's interesting to me because it's like, I think like when people go vegan or they're plant-based, like they feel like they have something to prove, right? And so it's like, that's why it's like, somebody just mentioned Game Changers, the documentary. But it's like,
that's an interesting one. In the Game Changers, they talk about like how to get the same amount of protein in grams from different foods, but they don't talk about the amino acid scores in that movie at all. They don't talk about the difference of, the DIAS scores of those different foods in that exact example. And if you look at the exact example that they use in the Game Changers, it's night and day suboptimal compared to the animal, like to a regular, like, steak and eggs, like 3-ounce steak and 3 eggs.
So if somebody's like building muscle on a plant-based diet, they're not building muscle because they're on a plant-based diet. They're building muscle despite being on a plant-based diet, right?
Yeah.
So it's just interesting, like the perspective that they have, like they're trying to prove like that's not the most optimal way, because there's millions of people who've been building their bodies. Like the bodybuilding community has been huge for a long time. You think by now, if building muscle were more efficient or quicker on a plant-based diet, they would have found out by now. That would have been cracked. There's a reason why people consume protein and have prioritized protein in that community, because through trial and error, through many, many, many people, it has been shown that this is effective through the science, through the different clinical studies. Like, so it's just like, I get the rebellious nature of wanting to go against what's common or popular, but there's just some things that we have to acknowledge that there's validity to through multiple repetitions, through people doing it before us. And I think protein building muscle is one of those things, and let me see, Twan said bodybuilders are not healthy per se, they hack the body. Well, yeah, but when I'm talking about body,
not to say debatable, it's debatable. The guys that do steroids, like that, if you include steroids in there, sure, you could say, but I mean, steroids aside, like natural bodybuilders are definitely not just hacking the body in general. And there's a lot of health advantages and longevity advantages to naturally accumulating muscle mass.
Right.
So there's definitely nuance to that topic.
For sure, yeah. And when I'm talking about bodybuilding, when I use it as an example, I'm just using it to build muscle. I'm not saying health in general. And that's not my approach. Like I wouldn't consider myself a bodybuilder or someone who's just out to like compete as a bodybuilder, but I'm using it as a reference because they're the ones who are aiming to build muscle, generally speaking, more so than any other community. But yeah, it's interesting because one of the markers of longevity is actually muscle mass, right? So if you can maintain muscle mass as you go into your older years, that's actually a marker of longevity. So it's not that muscle mass is anti-longevity or anti-health. It's that these bodybuilders are doing other shit and pushing it to other extremes using steroids and all kinds of different things that makes bodybuilding or building muscle, like the people conflate those two things. They're not the same shit, They're definitely not the same thing. So I get why people think that, because these bodybuilders are on a mission that's way beyond like the natural ability of the body to build muscle. So it makes it seem like, oh, well, bodybuilding is not healthy because that's your reference,
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of bodybuilders know a lot more about health than most of the vegan people that I speak to. Like they do more diligent research and they pay more attention to detail about things like nutrition and like different aspects of their lifestyle, like sleep, things like that commonly get swept under the carpet. And I feel like some of the plant, at least for a lot of people, plant-based movement, like a lot of decisions are made emotionally. A lot of the stuff, it's a lot less virtual and a lot more emotional in general. Another thing I wanted to add too is like a lot of people knock studies, right? Like people say like, oh, like studies are this, studies are that, like, oh, studies are no good, it's bullshit. And then like they're like, oh, anecdotes are where it's at, like, oh, personal experience is where it's at. if you look at like well done studies, all they are is people's personal experience that's documented with variables accounted for. So they're like, okay, we're all going to make sure that we're sleeping the same amount of time, we're eating the same amount of calories, and then we're both going to do different training programs and see which one helps us build the most muscle, right? One group's going to go heavy with lightweight or heavy with low reps, and one's going to go lightweight with lots of reps. And we're going to see if they eat the same diet, what they're going to do. That is realistically more repeatable and usable than somebody who doesn't remember how many calories they ate, wasn't tracking their food, doesn't know what their macronutrient splits were, and doesn't remember how much they slept at night to say, oh, I did this training program and it worked, or I did this training program and it didn't.
Right.
So your personal experience might actually not be as great of a reference point as a study is because you didn't account for variables. Now, if you account for as many variables as possible, you might do better than a study can do because it's hard to account for variables for like a large group of people for a study. That's also why they say like rat studies can be more useful than than human studies in some regards, because it's easier to account for variables in rats because they all live in the same cage. They're all exposed to the same shit. They're all doing the same thing. So sometimes it could actually add additional value and paint a picture that we can then worry about studying with humans. So, I mean, overall, as a concept with studies versus like real life experience, studies aren't necessarily not real life experience. They're real life experience for the people that were in the study. So you take that, you got to take everything with a grain of salt, and no study claims that it's like an undeniable fact.
Right.
Something that people in the industry really say, like, we know this for a fact, is when they have randomized control trials and meta-analyses where they analyze like hundreds or thousands of studies and they all point to the same conclusion, and then you can form a pretty solid consensus and say most of the time this is what can be expected from people if you can just.
And it's almost like there's a limited amount of factors anyways, right? Like genetic factors, environmental factors, stress factors. Also, the people might not be being honest as they could be, or maybe they're not noticing things as much as they could be. There's so many factors that you can't account for. So what you do is you take the study and information not as a blanket statement or a blanket truth, but you utilize that and try to formulate your hypothesis, testing on yourself. You variables. But I want to my love of urban and the world population is obese because of meat eating, though. So
I can't say I agree with that one, man. Can't say I agree.
Right. And
I can agree with that a little bit.
You know, the interesting thing is that I think that people, and that's one of the first things that people get rid of, right? People are trying to diet. They start eating less meat. You start seeing these big salads with like a little bit of meat. And the interesting thing is, like, if people just ate meat, they would lose weight. 100% of people that if they just ate meat, 100% of people would lose weight. I guarantee.
100%.
There's no way that you could eat just meat and gain a bunch of weight or become obese. Like, that is never going to happen. And if you must not have experience with that, or because it's like, that's been my experience, especially the most protein I eat. Protein really, and there's a lot of studies on satiety and protein. But so it's like the more protein you eat, actually, the more full you feel. And it's hard to consume a bunch of protein to the point where you're going to be obese or overeat. Not going to happen.
And protein isn't really an efficient energy source. Like, your body has to do like a lot of conversion to convert protein to energy. And there's also a high thermic effect of food from eating protein. So it burns more calories just digesting protein as opposed to fats or carbs.
Right.
And I mean, realistically, the issue with obesity, really, if I had to pin it down to one thing, is insulin resistance. We're going to get into this on Monday in a lot of detail. But basically, like, if you're just overeating energy in general to the point where, like, you're backed up, your muscles don't need any more glucose. Your muscles store, like, the majority of the glucose that you eat, right? So the more muscle mass you have, the more glucose you can eat. However, if you overload your muscles and there's too much glucose where your muscles don't eat anymore, there's nowhere else for it to go, then it goes to your liver stores it as fat. Then when your liver, stores it as fat, it goes into your adipose tissue or your fat cells. And every single person has what's called a personal fat threshold. So based on your genetics, some people can put on more adipose tissue than others. So some people can get insanely obese and get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger no matter what. People like me, we don't accumulate fat. Like, my whole family, like, we can't get fat if we try it. We put on visceral fat or ectopic fat. So it goes in the organs and muscles as opposed to, like, building more fat. And it's actually even less. They call this skinny fat. Either way, they're both products of insulin resistance, whether you're getting obese or you're building up ectopic fat. And realistically, all you have to do to fix this is just stop overeating those macronutrients, the fats and the carbs. And dial down the energy, eat higher protein so that you don't lose muscle so you can continue to burn off the glucose as you convert it. And then once you lose a lot of the body fat or you lose the, fat on your organs or within your muscles, then you can go back to eating carbs and stuff. So there is a lot of validity to the carnivore diet and this carnivore keto thing. If you're trying to increase insulin sensitivity from being overweight or from being skinny fat or having sarcopenic obesity, you are definitely going to make improvements by eating only meat for a period of time. However, my issue with the carnivore keto diet has to do with long-term. I think in the short term, it can be great for some people if you have the problem that it is set out to solve. It can be great. However, 5-10 years down the road, you don't have to be eating only meat. Like, eat the fucking blueberries, bro. You know what I mean? Like, it's
eat the fucking blueberry. That's a quote. I'm definitely not in that camp. And I follow some people that are in that camp where there's like plants are toxic almost camp, like just a very extreme perspective on plants. My focus has just been animal food, fruits, and animal foods. And I feel really good on that, and I feel like it gives me enough variety, enough different things. Fat, protein, and carbs. But it's like all simple and not processed foods, and then try to focus on more local foods and things like that, and just hitting my protein. Like I feel way more satiated when I eat enough protein, and it's way easier. Like right now I'm doing intermittent fasting from 12 to 6 p.m. And so I break my fast at 12. But I don't, like when I was raw vegan, I was hungry all the fucking time. I never remember feeling full. Like I might have been like, even if I ate like watermelon, like I was full of water, but I wasn't like satiated. You know what I mean?
If I was full, it was only because my stomach hurt. It wasn't because I was satisfied. Like I was never satisfied, but I was full.
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, the only time I wasn't hungry was when I was like really fasting really long to the point where I was like basically starving to death and tripping balls. And like, I was like, at that point, it kind of like the hunger kind of went away and it became like, when like you don't eat all day and then like later in the day, like the kind of stress, you kind of like lose your appetite. It kind of like got to that point. So pretty much that was the only time during the whole experience of the whole like either raw vegan or fruitarianism or fasting where the hunger really went away. But realistically, there was no point of like genuine satiation. Like I can eat like 6 eggs right now and just be completely satisfied for like a good 6 to 8 hours and just be doing all day.
And that's the difference in animal foods. And, it's like, it's unfortunate that there's all these ideologies that are stopping us from embracing it in a balanced way, or that limit our ability to really see what we're talking about for a lot of people, because a lot of people keep going back to like the more philosophical, moral component of it. But I just think from a very practical standpoint, it's very useful, and it's in our lineage ancestrally. It's who we are, And so for me, like having high protein really helps me to not feel hungry, and I can go hours without thinking about food. As before, it was like life was about food. I couldn't think about going anywhere because I had to plan what I was going to eat because I was hungry all the time, and I couldn't go 3-4 hours without missing a meal because it was a big deal for me. But now it's like, shit, I can be out all day. I could go the whole day without eating, and I'll be good because like I'm consuming enough daily protein, enough daily nutrients that I don't have to stress about food or live from that perspective. So if I could give that to somebody, I would really, because like I didn't feel that when I was doing it before, and now that I experience it, I'm like, oh, this is where it's supposed to feel like when you eat. You're supposed to feel like I'm straight, I'm good, not like I'm bloated because I have to stuff myself with the whole watermelon to try to feel like I'm full. Like that's a different type of like a full. I'm talking about feeling satiated. Like, okay, my body got what it needs. I can move on now.
Yeah, that can happen without even getting full. Like I could eat a 6-hour steak and feel satiated and not be full and still be able to suck my stomach in and do all the ab rolling.
Exactly.
Empty. And it's like, I'm completely satisfied and not thinking about food. I used to bring like fruit and juice in a backpack, like everywhere I went. I wasn't going anywhere for 3 hours without having juice and food, like for most of that entire time. So, I mean, let me see. There was one other comment that I wanted to acknowledge. Somebody mentioned like men and women. Yeah. Also, men and women are different. So our approach to eating and diet should be different. That is true to some degree, but it's not like a blanket statement like everything about our diet should be different. I mean, realistically, in both men and women, there's really no study out there. And there's lots of studies on protein consumption where they push the threshold on this. But there's really no negative consequences of eating too much protein other than you lose your hunger. So for me, like if you're aiming to build muscle and get big, there is a point, I think it's like above like 35% protein realistically. If that much of your diet is more than that is protein, it's going to be hard to eat enough carbs and fats to be able to like really get the most out of your diet and eat enough calories. At least for somebody who's skinny trying to gain weight like I was, keeping it around 25-30% was a much better ratio in order to be able to eat enough carbs to put the weight on. So it depends what your goals are. If you're trying to lose weight, then like it is what it is. And I mean, with women, body composition is ideally different as well. So like for men, we're looking at like 10 to 15% is like that sweet spot hormonally for hormone balance. And for women, it's realistically like 18 to 30.
It's interesting because like in I think in the Hadza or some of these tribes in Africa, there is actually there is a slight difference between what the men eat and what the women eat. The women favor a little more like carbohydrates than the men do, which I thought was interesting, right? Because we're talking about protein being a more masculine nutrient, and I think carbs would be a more feminine nutrient, and because it also helps put on fat. And you, as a woman, I think that women have a higher fat composition naturally already. So it's just interesting that there is a slight variation in the preference of these macronutrients, but generally speaking, it's going to be very similar. But I think if there was a difference, it would be in the more preference to carbohydrates for women than men.
Yeah, I could see that. Makes sense.
Can you see the question that's pulled up?
Yeah. Any notable health drawbacks? I'm aligned with all being shared, but asking to check my own blind spots. So is this with regard to eating like higher protein or to building muscle or?
I think we're eating higher protein. The second part was this.
Okay. Also lots of talk about gout, but I've read that gout is mainly when meat is paired with a sugar. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't really combine meat with simple sugars often, but a lot of people do. Some people do like fruit with their meat. I usually only do potatoes or like some kind of like complex carbs with the meat. And that's honestly just out of preference, but there might be something to that because it is a common thing that it's a common food combination, the complex carbs with the meat. I would say realistically, maybe because the complex carbs take longer to process. So you're not like breaking down the glucose as fast. Perhaps like, I don't know, something with the simple sugars could be an issue with it. But honestly, I wouldn't even say that meat paired with sugar is directly causative of gout either. I at least haven't seen anything of that. So I would have to look into that further to really give like a straight up like answer on that. It's out of my wheelhouse. But.
Yeah, that is one of the things that you hear about eating meat, that it's, it causes gout and stuff, uric acid. There you go. Yeah, I've definitely heard that a couple of times, and yeah, it's just interesting because, like, I guess I use traditional ancestral practices in diets as kind of a framework, and when you're looking at them, like they're eating a lot of meat, like that's what they prefer, and so it's like, and it goes back to the anecdotal studies. Like, there's so many factors, right? Like somebody could be eating meat, but they're not really accounting for the fact that they're cooking it in canola oil, or the fact that, they're also eating, little Debbie cakes in between their meat. Like, there's all kinds of other shit that's like in the mix that, like when it's in isolation, like I haven't observed that you get all these different symptoms or these different pathologies that people attribute to meat.
Yeah, there's got to be like other variables and other factors involved. Because, I mean, I do eat a lot of meat, and I do eat a lot of sugar, and I don't have gout. So that does happen to people. There's got to be other factors involved. As a former gymnast and being out of training for 3 to 5, how am I retaining muscle still? I mean, I wonder what you're eating. Oh, okay. I love how there's always a second one that like answers that question. Okay. Also, with and without meat protein as part of the equation. I mean, you could be sleeping well, could still just be like not in a caloric deficit. So you're just maintaining calorie wise. With the other, whatever you're getting, you could be getting a decent amount of amino acids. You might still be hitting your protein targets, even if you're eating plants. So it's not like entirely plausible that you wouldn't keep your muscle mass. Basically, like what we were discussing before is that like a lot of people who are jacked on plant-based diets or on food diets, like they got jacked and they were athletes prior. They built a lot of muscle prior, and that's why they're able to keep it once they get on these diets. But a lot of people aren't hopping on these diets and they're building. Another thing, is like, we're going to talk about this in serious detail on Monday, but the way that muscles grow is like muscles the only type of cell that can have more than one nucleus. So like when you break down muscle and you rebuild it, they're called satellite cells. They're basically stem cells that are donating their nuclei to the muscle cell so they can grow back stronger. So this is where like that muscle memory comes in. Like if you've built muscle in a period of time in your life, you're more likely to be able to build it faster, and you're more likely to be able to maintain muscle better than someone who like only went through one period of time where they built muscle and then they just stopped lifting. If you had a career of athleticism, then you're more likely to have more nuclei per muscle cell. So you're more able to maintain or build it back quick if you were to lose it. I think that's also a big reason why I was able to build as fast as I was, because I had the athletic background. I was doing bodybuilding in high school before I lost all the weight. So the muscles that I trained a lot in high school, like my abs and like my traps, were able to grow a lot faster than like other muscles that I didn't train as much.
Yeah, and we didn't say that you couldn't build muscle on or maintain muscle on plant-based or non-meat diets. We're just saying that
harder to build.
Yes, it's more challenging. It's more efficient with animal foods. That was the point.
I mean, I know a couple guys that are on the fruit diet and the plant-based diet that are like freaking jacked out of their minds. I mean, Brian Mirabella, he's been on the fruit for a couple of years. He's still freaking jacked. And Brian Mirabella, the breathwork coach.
Oh, okay. There's somebody else. What's his name? I don't know. I think he was like fruitarian, and I used to see him on YouTube, and he's like, I saw a picture of him. Like he was looking pretty good, and I don't know if he just. Yeah,
there's a couple better. There's a couple. Yeah, I don't remember all of them. Brian's the one that stands out to me the most because I've seen him for like a couple of years now. Stick with it, and he's about it. And I know that he's not on juice.
So Dan, what's your thoughts on creatine in addition to what you said in context for active individuals with hybrid strength training and endurance?
Phenomenal question. I think creatine is an essential nutrient. I think everybody should be eating enough of it from meat or taking it supplementally. Realistically, the amount of creatine that we have the ability to store is indicative of the fact that we should be consuming around 5 grams or more per day, depending on our muscle mass, because it's stored in muscle. It plays a role in energy, so it's not really related to muscle building per se in the way that a lot of people think it is. It doesn't really affect muscle protein synthesis directly. Its main role is the creatine phosphate system, which is like works through ATP. So like the way ATP, which is like your energy currency in your body, works is it'll release, it's adenosine triphosphate. So it's like adenosine with 3 phosphates on it. It'll lose 1 phosphate and that frees up an electron, which gives you energy. And then creatine catches the phosphate, creating creatine phosphate. ATP turns into ADP because there's only 2 phosphates instead of 3. And what creatine does is it takes that phosphate, brings it somewhere else in your muscle, and gives the phosphate back to another ADP to make it ATP again. So you get a loop. So what creatine does is it gives you that extra energy boost. It's your body's fastest source of energy in the moment. So it's what gets you through those last couple of reps of the set. It's what gets you through that last 10 yards of the sprint, the creatine phosphate system. So realistically, and it works for your brain too. Your brain uses more ATP than any other area of your body individually. So there was a study that they did on vegans and vegetarians, like all people that didn't eat meat, different varieties of diets that didn't eat meat versus, actually all of them were just like that. And then what they did was they tested not muscle building, not performance in the gym, only IQ. They tested their IQs beforehand, and then they supplemented with, I think it was 5 grams of creatine daily for 6 weeks, and they tested their IQs again. And there was an average in that study of 20% increase in IQ just from supplementing creatine.
Man,
because your brain,
I might have to supplement some creatine.
It's the one supplement that I would say, like, no matter what, everybody should just take creatine, unless you're eating 2 pounds or more of beef per day. If you're not eating like more than 2 pounds of meat a day, then you're not getting your 6. Or like salmon could be comparable to, but it would be same deal, like around 2 pounds of meat, muscle meats would be the equivalent of like 5 to 6 grams of creatine per day. And that's really what you're looking at. So if you're eating like a pound of meat a day instead of 2 pounds, you would want to supplement like 2 grams, like a half a scoop instead of like a whole scoop.
Oh, okay.
If you just want to hit that 5 grams per day, anything above that is really like excess and unnecessary. You're probably just going to pee it out. But I mean, doses of like, I think it's like 20, 30 grams a day for like a couple months in a row have been like safely, done in studies. Creatine is like the number one most researched supplement of all time. And it's well known in the industry to be completely safe with no actual real side effects. Like the water retention and things like that people claim are issues with creatine are realistically just a result of like way overdosing the creatine. That's really all it comes down to. And even then, when you way overdose it, the only side effects are really just like a little bit of like water retention and like puffiness in your skin and muscles. But another thing to note as well with muscle building with creatine is creatine also blocks myostatin receptors. So what I said before is how like myostatin's like that protein regulated by your genetics that stops you from growing muscle. It stops protein synthesis. Creatine stops myostatin from binding to its activin 2 beta receptor. So basically what happens is like other drugs that block that receptor are illegal even in professional bodybuilding because they're like so fucking anabolic. So I mean, creatine blocks that receptor. So it's like the only legal myostatin blocker out there, and they can't ban it because it's literally in food. They can't tell everybody to stop eating steak so that they don't eat for the myostatin blocking benefits. So
did you have any brands or recommendations to where to get it from?
Honestly, it's one of those where there's an industry standard. There's like hundreds of brands that are all straight. Just do creatine monohydrate with nothing else added. Like don't fall for like pre-alkaline or these other creatine varieties that are supposedly like better digested or better for whatever. Like realistically, just creatine monohydrate, straightforward. All the prices are pretty much exactly the same, whatever brand you get. And, all the serving sizes should be 5 grams. The scoop should always be 5 grams. But anything that's different or variety that's like more money saying they have the secret formula, they're just trying to reinvent the wheel so they can increase their profit margins. It's not worth it.
Do you have you done any research on this?
L-Gant. I took it during my first transformation when I was first building muscle. I was taking L-Gantler Velvet. I got it from, I think it was like Tonic Treasures, my boy Quay's business. He offered it to me and was like, hey, if you're doing, you're putting on muscle, you're trying to get big, like try this shit. And I was like, all right, I'll try it. I didn't account for any variables, but it tasted a little gross, but it was like, the theory behind it is interesting. It's like the fastest growing tissue in biology. So it'll like help you grow fast. I don't know actually a lot of details about what's in it or what the mechanisms behind that statement are or how that would be relevant to like consuming it and seeing if that helps you build muscle. But I've known about it for a while, actually, even since high school. I found it for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories of people like basically where it's like almost like some people say it's almost like a steroid compound. But yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, I just started taking it recently, but I'm interested. But it's also a lot of health wise for like joints and stuff like that. And it's literally just like the antlers that they drop anyways, and yeah, powdered form into capsules. So it's like super simple whole food kind of product. So interested in trying it out. Somebody said, how can a woman after 40 legs that seems to be losing muscles, so they need to work out?
I mean, if you want to build any kind of muscle, you have to train. Like the only way to really downregulate myostatin enough to allow for muscle growth is to train. It's like nothing lowers it more than that. You can get all the sunlight in the world. Like you have to train the muscle if you want to grow it, no matter.
And do you have to train it to failure? Like, should they be feeling like sore the next day? Like, how do they know they're like training to that extent to where the muscle is, being growing bigger?
So there's a couple things. I'm going to keep going back to myostatin because realistically, the only way to grow muscle is to get myostatin to go down. Like you're only training, you're only doing everything you do to build muscle just to get myostatin to go down for a couple hours so your muscles can grow. If myostatin was not there, your muscles would just grow uncontrollably and there would be nothing to stop them. And nothing specifically that you have to do to fuel it. So you only have to stop what's stopping it. So a big thing with that is lactic acid. So you have 2 different kinds of muscle fibers. You have fast twitch and slow twitch. When you use slow twitch, you're just releasing carbon dioxide and water when you use those muscle fibers. But when you use fast twitch muscle fibers, which are the ones that are most amenable to growth, you're going to get lactic acid release as well. So that means that you are going to feel the burn. So if you're not feeling the burn on your sets, right? Like, when you do like leg extensions or something like that, where like your legs are absolutely on fire, that is gas release. The more reps that you get that absolutely burn the shit out of you, those are ones that are going to contribute to growth. You can also tell if you're getting a pump. So the pump is a good indicator of how much muscle growth you're actually going to get from that training session. So if you get like a decent pump and, you see that the growth from the pump, then that's going to be indicative of how much you're going to grow from that workout. If you do other things that make sure that myostatin doesn't go back up, because cortisol spikes myostatin. So if you don't eat enough carbs, if you don't eat carbs during, before, after your workout, if you're not sleeping enough, if you're super stressed, things like that, you're going to spike cortisol and myostatin is going to go up, and all of the hard work that you just put in the gym is going to go away, because myostatin is going to go back up, and it's like, oh nope, he's back, he's stopping us from growing again. So there's other things you can do to maximize your pump, like making sure you're eating enough salt, making sure your nitric oxide production is on point. There's a couple other things. We're not going to get into super detail right now. And then the other thing I would say is just make sure that your nutrition is on point and that you're not overtraining. Make sure that your like recovery is good. I don't like the word overtraining. I prefer like under recovering. Make sure that you're recovered. And again, if you have the ability to recover every single day, then you can just go back at it and train every single day. But if you don't and you're super sore, there's no point of going back and just creating more muscle damage before they're recovered.
Yeah, and I would say
It's not very exciting time.
like if you're not seeing like improvement in your muscle over like a couple of months, like maybe you're not doing something right in terms of the training. Because it's like I think some people, they'll go to the gym and they'll pick up some weights and like they'll just do some curls or something like that, but they're not like intentionally training, right? They're not like really going hard to the point where it's like that your body is being torn down and it's going to rebuild back up. So it's like there is like I noticed that too when I feel that burn. I have a sense like, okay, like I'm doing the work, like something's working. And then there's other days that I might just go in there and I might just not. It just might be one of those days where I'm just going in just to go that day, But I'm not feeling that same type of pump. So there's definitely a different the intensity at which you go and the strategy that you have when you work out. And you have to be intentional about wanting to build muscle, not just like picking up a weight and saying that you did exercise today,
100%. I would say like nutrition and sleep are the two biggest factors that determine whether it's one of those days where you feel on versus one of those days where you feel off and you're just going to go through the motions. So those are the two factors to consider. And then additionally, like that mind-muscle connection is really important. I'm a big advocate for working out with no shirt or wearing like a really like I wear those like Hanes like tank tops, like wife beaters, like so you can see a lot of like your arms and your shoulders and your back like while you're lifting. To look at the muscle that you're training, it does something different. It allows you to really like connect with the muscle. And realistically, what you're doing when you're growing muscle is, like I said before, you're bringing nuclei into the muscle cell. So stronger muscles, bigger muscles that can grow faster are smarter muscles. That's why you see guys that have like really big chests that can like bounce their pecs like crazy. Or like if you've built a muscle, you have the ability to isolate it and control it, flex it on its own because there's more nuclei, there's more brains in the muscle. So like focusing your brain on the muscle like helps to contract it on its own and isolate it. Like if you're not really focusing on the muscle you're training, you're not going to grow it because myostatin is relevant to different muscles. So if you train your arms today and not your legs, myostatin in your legs isn't going down. Your legs aren't growing. So that's why I'm also a big advocate for full body workouts. You train every muscle group consistently so that every single time you train, myostatin is going down in every single muscle so your whole body can grow at once. But if you're going to do that, you're going to have to eat more to compensate.
And rest more.
There's a lot to unpack there. But overall,
I think we'll just answer this one last question. What's the best raw or cooked food proteins get destroyed?
So I mean, from what I've seen, cooking doesn't really necessarily destroy proteins. There are things like enzymes and like growth factors and stuff like that, like in milk from pasteurizing, that get destroyed. I would suppose that from cooking meat, certain like enzymes and growth factors and different like things like that do get destroyed to some degree when you cook food. But realistically, the proteins themselves are definitely still very absorbable when cooked, especially with meat. What else was I going to say about that? When it comes to there was something I wanted to say.
Robert Cook. Yeah, because I have heard that a lot. Like, the proteins get denatured during the cooking process.
Sorry. Oh, my bad. It was like, I don't know about you, but like personally, when I cook a steak, like I'm not cooking it a lot. Like, cooking the outside of it, like the inside of the steak is like super rare.
Yeah.
There's like a sweet spot where you cook it just right and it like kind of melts in your mouth. It's like not cooked. It's not charring, and there's no what's it called? The Maillard reaction isn't really taking place anywhere except the outside of the steak.
Fear.
And I'm a big fan of like broiling as opposed to like cooking on the pan, so like the outside gets like crispy and burnt. I mean, I'm cool with it, but like it's not my preference. If I'm making my steak at home, I don't really burn it to the outside like that. I cook on lower heat and let it kind of like cook evenly more, so that like it's just cooked enough where it's soft. So I'm not chewing a raw steak for an hour, but I'm also not chewing an overcooked steak for an hour. I feel like the sweet spot is really like where it's supposed to be digested for us.
Right. Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Yeah. I think so too. I prefer definitely more on the rare side. Yeah, like I think it's just gets tougher either way you go, right? Either really raw or fully cooked. There's like you get tougher on those. You're right. There is like a middle spot that's actually more digestible for us. So yeah, I think that's all the questions we're going to answer today. So
Yeah.
if anybody's interested, this is for Wild Brotherhood members only. On Monday, we're going to have a call with Nick. He's going to give his breakdown on all these things into even more detail, expanding on all talked about building muscle, diet. So yeah, if you're interested, check that out. Like I said, for the next 3 people that sign up, I'm going to be giving them a protein ancestral fuel, ancient strength protein powder, a bucket of that for the next 3 people. So if you've been thinking about it, right now will be a good time. If not, we got you some other time. The replay of this will be saved. And also Monday's presentation, all our calls get saved on Wild Brotherhood. We have a members area where you can revisit all the previous calls, all the resources. We got the Discord server with all the different topics. We're always sharing videos and resources to keep us accountable, to help us out, getting you information, and to just be in the brotherhood, building ourselves, one another up through all these different facets of life. And this month, we just happen to be focused on fitness and physique. So this is why we're talking about this today. But if you're interested, go to wild-brotherhood.com. You can learn more. Yeah, thanks so much, Nick, for coming on, sharing your wealth of information. Follow Nick, his new account right now. And so, yeah, he's going to be sharing all this stuff on his page. This is what he teaches. He has also his, what's your community called?
Mine's the Top T community.
We're in the Top T community. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's on Discord. Realistically, the community is only available now to people who take any of my programs. So we have the Natty Cycle Bootcamp, which just went. So it's over now, but the recordings are still available if anybody wants them with the textbook. Working on a new project as well that I'm going to be launching pretty soon on the new account. For anybody who, knows me from the past or doesn't know me from the past, I, just recently started a new account. After about 5 years of growing my account, I decided to kind of switch it up and start fresh on a new account and grow that. So that was just as of a couple days ago. So I would really appreciate for any of you who are either already following or not, engagement on any of the posts. Engage with this after it gets posted, this live. Any of it really helps with the momentum when the page is first starting out. I'm pretty proud with the progress that we've had so far, like over 1,000 followers the first day, but pretty excited for the fresh start, and definitely going to be sharing a lot of fucking solid knowledge with you guys as well. Last thing I want to say before we head out is I also signed up for Quetzal's Wild Brotherhood a couple months ago, and honestly, the calls are super fire. The way that Quetzal holds the community and the calls, the frame of it is super helpful, and the information is really solid. I originally joined when we were going over the social media stuff, and through the last couple months, we've gone through social media, we've gone through business with Anthony Manuel's presentation, which was amazing, and now we're doing muscle building and stuff is cool. So now I get to share as well in the community. So if anybody's considering joining, like I personally also joined and I've had a great experience so far and really actually get a lot of value out of the community. And I've been meaning to do a testimonial for Quetzal as well. So this will be like the precursor to my testimonial video that I actually post.
Yeah, birthday, brother. Yeah, I'm glad you got some value. I'm really having fun too, just having different people come on, share their knowledge, their wisdom, and just create that network of, conscious, purpose-driven men who are in their bag and we can just collaborate on different projects and just build each other up so we can dominate in all areas of our life, like not just like one thing, but whether it's hunting, fitness, business. Like I want us to all be, just striving for, just being really high achieving in all these areas. And so, yeah, man, I'm glad that you're a part of it, and I'm excited for your presentation this Monday. So let's get it. Appreciate you, brother. I'll talk to you later.
Everybody coming in. Appreciate it.
Peace.
Peace.